I did a goofy thing and I wrote down one word to describe every single year from Bionicle Generation 1. So I wanted to talk about that and why I chose these words. Also, they all end in a Y. I just thought that was cute. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So 2001, I chose the word mystery. And I think it's pretty obvious why, right? A lot of the strength of 2001 in my mind comes from the sort of aura that it has, the fog, the haze that covers this island, because we know that heroes exist here. We know that villagers and elders exist here, and we know that these animals exist here as well. But like you and me, venturing out into the wild, the wilderness, the woods behind our house as kids for the first time, which is very true for me, it felt like that's what we were taking on. I was familiar with this, and I think it's a good way to start a theme like this to really hammer home for a lot of reasons. Obviously, 2001 followed on the footsteps of franchises like Pokemon, which is also about animals in the wilderness, right? But also being introduced to this as a kid growing up in 2001 was very interesting for me because, yeah, my house bordered on the woods behind me where I would see a plethora of different animals, be they deer or sometimes even occasionally turkeys, which was not common, but it did happen because it was still, an urban kind of area, right? At the same time, mystery to me also implies that we don't know where we are. We don't know who we are. We don't know what the story of this place is. Yes, we understand that there's a big bad here. There's an evil form. And I was not somebody who was privy to the Motonui online games as a kid. I didn't really have the internet access to get to those games, even if I wanted to. But even my friends weren't really super aware of them. So I was somebody that did not get to play those games until much later. Even without those games, and perhaps because I didn't get to play them, there was a lot of information that just was never filled in for me. And I take that as a good thing, because there's a lot you can learn from holding information back. And it's one of Bionicle's original strengths, in my opinions. It's also one of the things that I think kind of harmed it later, because Bionicle went from holding things back to basically just trying to explain every little thing. Why was there a full moon on this Tuesday 1,400 years ago? You're going to get an explanation. It's annoying. Anyway, second year, 2002 Bionicle, I chose the word discovery. Now, that one might seem a little bit interesting at first. Discovery, the reason I suggested this word is because of the discovery of the Borak, right? Could have been this, it could have been awakening, whatever the case may be. But discovery to me made more sense because the Borak also are not agents of Makuta. I wouldn't have known that as a kid. I thought that they probably were, related to him in some way. But they're not. And in fact, we got introduced to the fact later that they sort of filled a very specific purpose on the island, that they were basically just awakened earlier than they were supposed to be because of their premature discovery, right? And so that word says a lot to me. And it also follows up the previous one, right? If there is a mystery, you need to discover the reasons for said mystery, or need to discover what that mystery is leading to. And 2002 is a good follow-up for this reason as well. 2003, I chose the word destiny. And I think this one actually makes a bit of sense because of the fact that we got our destined seventh Toa. Now, I am not somebody who really likes the trope of a chosen one, an extra teammate to defeat the evil. I do think that it's a fine line to walk, though I think that Bionicle did a pretty good job with it, all things considered, at least this first time around, right? Now, reintroducing Takanuva again in 2008 was kind of redundant, and again, I think a little bit annoying, but as a Titan set, it was at the very least kind of a cool looking dude, right? So, 2004 is where I use the word legendary. For one thing, this is the introduction of the City of Legends, so that makes sense to me. But also, again, as I've implied that I'm not a big fan of chosen ones as a trope, when I hear the word City of Legends, I understand that legends means stories in a lot of ways, but legends can also mean legendary heroes, legendary figures, legendary people in general. And that sort of falls back on that chosen one trope a little bit. I'm not the biggest fan of this kind of stuff because I don't want to be told that where I'm living is a legend, where I'm living, where I'm the story I'm taking place in is destined to succeed or anything. And that's one of the interesting things about 2004 is that the Toa that the Toa fail for the first time. And I like that because it is a subversion of expectations, right? Really, the entirety of the Metru story arc is them failing into success, right? So I quite enjoy that about the Toa Metru, and it's probably my favorite aspect of them because though they are Toa, they make a lot of mistakes. They do a lot of crap wrong. And in part, it's because they're brand new Toa. It's one of the reasons why the way that I wrote the Toa in my story, and I really didn't change anything about them individually, but in my rewrite of the 2004 story, it was to sort of embrace the fact that they failed as often as they did. And, you know, embracing the fact that they learn from that failure, understanding that it's inevitable for them to fail in specific scenarios and to take that and use that to their advantage, you know? Anyway, different video. You can watch that one after this one. But 2005, this word's probably going to be a little controversial, redundancy. And I think it also makes sense. 2005 is my least favorite year from Bionicle. I've went over this in a previous video as well, close to a month ago now. But in general, I think it is the embodiment of this word. For one thing, it's redundant in the sense that it introduces even more flashbacks with the Toa Haga sets, and that's annoying. It's really unnecessary, honestly, but I get it. LEGO's trying to justify the sale of these 2 brand new sets they designed, though I wish they would have just stuck with the fact that they were Toa Duma and Toa Nadiki, right? Like that would have at least been better. They're established characters, and that way you wouldn't have to necessarily go back to a flashback of characters we had never met before. But rather, if there was a flashback involving them at all, it would have been characters we had already been introduced to the previous year. Would have been great. I don't know why that was changed last minute. Kind of annoying. And of course, obviously, it's something that I rewrote for my story as well. Again, video in at the end of this video, I guess. That said, redundancy. Why else do I choose that word? Because I really feel like 2005 is a year that did not need to exist. For one thing, 2005 does not have a lot of time that passes between 2004's end with the Toa Metru leaving the island and then coming back, and then 2005 where the island is suddenly just caked in Visorak, right? There's not a lot of time that happens between that, so it always bothered me just how quickly the Visorak were able to take over, which again is why in my story in 2005 that actually takes place in the present time, not in the past, but point still stands, right? But I also think it's redundant in that it's kind of the first year of Bionicle that I think doesn't introduce like anything new to it. It definitely has new sets, don't get me wrong, but with the exception of maybe the Visorak's pinching function, which is kind of an evolution on the Vaki even, it doesn't do anything we hadn't really seen before. And so that's another reason why I picked this word specifically. 2006, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. I chose edgy. Because what else was it, right? You had the All-American Rejects commercials and things like that, which is fantastic, you know, a nice way to get some cross-promotion. Obviously really helped with promoting these new Bionicle sets. And you had a lot of sets that had kind of an edgy look to them. I mean, literally Nuparu had like a mohawk and things like that. Definitely interesting, definitely a choice. Maybe not everybody's favorite, but at the very least, like, I can understand what they were trying to go for here. And at the very least, although the sets were still pretty dark in 2006, there was some color involved in there as well. I'll take it, right? 2007, novelty. Now this one I want to explain because 2007 is sort of a highlight in the later half of Bionicle. I break Bionicle, I mean, you can break it up into 3 different segments, obviously. The Toa Mata story arc, the Toa Metru story arc, and of course the Ignition trilogy story arc. And then obviously you have the Glatorian era at the very end, but point being, this to me, 2007 is the highlight of the Ignition trilogy. I think it has the most identity to it because years prior, Bionicle was its own thing or retreading old ground. Right? Again, this is especially true for 2005 and even to some degree 2006. But 2007 felt like LEGO understood we want to make this toy stand out. We want to make it completely new and different from anything else on store shelves. And I mean, maybe you can point to like Aquaman figures or something like that, but I can't think of anything else that looked like what Bionicle 2007 looked like. And it was so fresh and original. It's something we'd never seen even from Bionicle itself. Again, no functionality to the sets with the exception of Lissavic's Sea Sled or whatever. But outside of that, just generally speaking, I think that the sets worked really well. It's probably the most solid year for modern Bionicle. And I say modern in the sense of like the Anika building portion of it, not CCBS, not G2, right? And so to me, there's really nothing that goes anywhere close to Bionicle 2007 from the later half. Anyway, moving on to 2008, I chose the word fragility. I think that's pretty obvious, but I feel like there's something else that could describe it too, and it's that it takes a few steps backwards again. Now, I love the idea of characters in the sky. Obviously, this is part of the Ignition trilogy's whole like shtick, right? Land, air, and sea. I get it. Completely understand. The vehicles from 2008 are definitely the selling point, definitely the highlight for me. But the characters themselves, they have some pretty cool silhouettes, but they fall backwards on the color thing a bit. They're still brighter, definitely. I mean, you've got colors like lime green, like orange in there, but they're still pared down with neutral colors like gray or black with the villains, right? And so while that is visually distinctive, you know who's a good guy and who's a bad guy just looking at them. It's also kind of unnecessary in my opinion. And what I would have liked to have seen, especially if LEGO still wanted to do black and dark gray like undertones, would have been to include a secondary color to each of these sets, right? I don't know what you would choose for each of them, but the point stands. And so, yeah, that's unfortunately what we got. Obviously, the fragility of the new socket joints, which really kind of hammered the nail into the coffin of Bionicle, in my opinion. I really think it's one of the main reasons why Bionicle ended when it did, but that's another story for another video. And lastly, 2009, I chose the word legacy. And now the reason I chose this word is because I actually think that 2009 could have been successful. LEGO didn't really treat it the way I think it deserved. For one thing, including more Anika builds. For the fourth year in a row, of course they're going to get dragged through the mud for having the same build again. People had already been complaining about it in 2008. So, of course they're going to do so in 2009. It also didn't help that, again, they were using those fragile joints. But I think that 2009 also has a lot of its own identity. It definitely doesn't have sort of the aquatic thing that 2007 has going on, but it does have a lot of the color that 2007 helped to bring back into the spotlight for Bionicle. There's a reason that I display those sets so often in the background there. They're very fun to look at. They're very aesthetically pleasing, and they have a lot of individualistic personality and characteristics to them. But I also understand that it is kind of falls flat in a lot of areas too, because it doesn't live up to the hype I want it to in my head, and it very easily could. I think to myself, as a bit of a thought experiment, if 2009 Bionicle had been released to basically the same effect, but had fixed the sockets and had introduced us to a gearbox instead of the Anika body, maybe something about the same size as the Anika body, but with gears that were attached to the arms, would it have sold better? Because I feel like in part, yes. I can't know that. I can't go back in time. But at the very least, I do remember making a lot of my decisions by 2009 on the reviews that were being posted online. And a common criticism of these sets was that they did not have functions. And when you read that 6 times in a row, when you're looking at every set from a single wave, yeah, it's the same con, obviously, but it just keeps hammering itself home, right? However, I guarantee you it would have been a pro if people saw those sets and said, functions are back or something like that, right? So generally speaking, I think that LEGO could have done it better had they reintroduced the functions to the sets. But again, it's not the world we live in. I have played around with this idea with Gresh specifically. It's something I'll touch on in a different video. But overall, I think visually they are distinctive. They're not the best sets, don't get me wrong, and I definitely think the Legends wave is worse than the primary wave from the first half of 2009, but generally speaking, I think they're pretty okay sets, definitely underrated, but that's basically everything I wanted to talk about in this video. So this is just going over Generation 1 Bionicle, not Generation 2. Maybe I'll include those in a future video, but overall, I'm pretty happy with it. So let me know your thoughts. What is one word that you would choose to describe every single year of Bionicle revolving around your story, right? And they don't have to end with a Y. That was just a silly thing that I did. All right, I'll see y'all in the next one, and make sure to subscribe. Helps the channel out. Links in the description. Take care.